Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Broken Families, where we discuss and host conversations on divorce, parental alienation, and high conflict relationships. My name is Andrew Faulkner.
And I'm Barbara Lapointe. Great to be here with you, Andrew.
Absolutely. Definitely. It's always awesome doing these podcasts with you. So today we're going to talk about alienation, and we're going to talk about how alienation impacts the child. This is something that we get a lot of questions about, something that a lot of parents are just wondering what their child is going through on the other side. What are they going through? What kind of abuses are they going through? And how is it possible that they are just being twisted into being this hurt young child? So in that respect, before we get started, there were a couple disclaimers we wanted to throw out there before we really get deep into this, because this is an emotional episode. This is a very emotional topic. First and foremost, as you listen to this episode, be sure to self-regulate. Be sure to work through your emotions, whether that's through journaling with a coach or with a good support network or support group. That is because you don't want to listen to this episode and be like, oh no, now that I know what my kids are going through, I need to go out and talk to them, or I need to do something rash. And as always, we encourage more thoughtful, more focused kind of thinking as far as how you interact with your alienated child. So you don't want to be making any quick, fast emotional reactions based on this episode. So make sure, take some time, listen to it, think about it, and work through those emotions. The second disclaimer we want to put out there is the questions that Barbara's going to be throwing at me. A lot of it's going to be based on my own experiences. This does not mean that every child goes through this. This does not mean that my experiences are universal. At the same time, your child might go through something that I've never been through before. So everyone's going to react differently. We're all different people. And also keep in mind that I'm speaking from a very self-aware point of view. Sometimes the child will experience something similar, but they're not self-aware. And so it's going to be a subconscious reaction instead of a conscious reaction. So without further ado, Barbara, let's get started.
Okay, well said, Andrew. And if I could just back up and just support you in what you just said, that just invite our audience to take what serves them and leave the rest, and also an invitation to just sit with this information for a few days or a few weeks to allow it to process and integrate before you act upon it. And that might be very helpful as well. So I think we were going to start our questions, our line of questioning with how does parental alienation impact a child's identity? Before I totally land that question on your lap, Andrew, I'll just sort of preface by saying that a child's identity is formed, of course, when they're throughout their life, but when they're very, very young, they're attached to their parents, primarily their mother, and there is no separation of identity because they're bonded with mom or dad. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it might be neat as we do this podcast to view it with this overarching lens of the past and the future, and just the whole timeline that faces a child going through alienation, rather than one moment, just the whole timeline, because it's really an early trauma, and that can turn into a generational trauma.
Absolutely. So the question is definitely a very big one. How does alienation impact a child's identity? And I want to start off by saying that in a normal, healthy relationship between two people, you have two different identities interacting with each other. And even in in an intimate relationship, your partner wouldn't be an extension of yourself. They are their own person. And likewise, in a healthy relationship with a child, the child will be developing their own identity, and they are not in any way an extension of the parent. at least beyond that initial attachment period that Barbara was talking about.
Exactly.
So what ends up happening with a child during the alienation process is the opposite. They are forced to adopt an identity that is molded by the alienating parent. What I mean by this is that they have a explicit set of rules that they have to follow, as an explicit set of behaviors they have to follow. And the moment they stop following those behaviors, it it leads to punishment. It leads to a lot of yelling, a lot of anger. It can lead to forms of abuse. It really does depend on that dynamic behind the relationship. So for starters, it really does come down to what identity is being molded for them. And this can influence their behavior on all fronts, whether it influences their reactions and how they interact with the erased parent. It influences their relationships. It influences how they do in school. Um, and so I've been speaking very broadly just because there's so many different ways that this could pan out. Now, to kind of zoom in a little bit more and kind of show you what I'm talking about, let's just say, for the example, the alienating parent is someone who has a strong sense of value in their vanity. Maybe there's somebody who wants to be seen as the best business person, the best parent, the best coach, the best anything. What ends up happening is that vanity is projected on the child. Now the child is being an extension of that parent. If the child is not the best, then that child impacts the vanity of the alienating parent. So, say for example, that child is an athlete. They need to be the best athlete. Otherwise, they're going to get a lot of pressure, a lot of projected emotion from that vain alienating parent. Say they're a student, they have to be a top tier student. Otherwise, one A minus, it's not good enough. They're going to get in a lot of trouble. They have to push forward and be the best of the best. And this will translate across everything they do. It kind of creates this sense of performance anxiety. They have to be an overachiever. They have to be as good as they can, or beyond as good as they can, because the bar keeps raising. They could be a student that gets 100%, and they're going to be told, yeah, but it could have been better. And it will crush their confidence because their confidence is rooted in being the best. So that's just one example through vanity. Maybe your alienating parent is somebody who's invasive. Maybe they want to dive in and just read all their personal stuff, read their texts, read their emails, read everything that they're doing. Maybe they don't allow them to have personal time or personal space, and you end up having one of two reactions. Either your child is going to be molded into somebody who allows themselves to never have boundaries, and so they just allow someone to pretty much invade their life and invade their privacy, and likewise subsequently have no sense of privacy, or they will adopt that behavior of being invasive to other people.
So let's just maybe just slow it down a bit here, because what you're describing to me almost sounds like a control over a child, like the reading of the diary, or it all, to me, everything you just said sounds like a lot of coercive control.
It absolutely is a form of control. And because the identity of the child has to be in line with the the goals and ambitions of the alienating parent. If the alienating parent can't control their identity, then what's to say that the child doesn't start talking to the erased parent? What's to say that the child doesn't, in a sense, fuse with the alienating parent? In order to mitigate the tension, they have to control everything. And instead of recognizing that the child is their own person, the child is going to grow up into their own personality and their own likes and dislikes. They're only going to allow very superficial disagreements, but fundamentally, they want all those values that they carry within themselves. They want that projected onto the child so that the child will, in a sense, bolster the alienating parent in anything they do.
So while all of this is going on with the alienated parent and the child, what's happening with the other parent?
So with the other parent, they don't see all this happening, and what they get is the that front page picture of what's going on. So they see, in a sense, a miniature version of the alienating parent in this child, and the erased parent's like, who is this person? How did you go from the sweet, young, and innocent child that I remember into this invasive person, this angry person, this person who's very spiteful? And you in as an erased parent, that none of these emotions were natural to them. None of these feelings and thoughts that they're having is something that they came up with. It was, in a sense, spoon fed to their mind over and over again until it became the only thing that they know. Repetition is the most powerful form of brainwashing. And we see this in all across the world, whether it's in advertising or even in abuse. And so the child is just swallowing all this poison that's being fed to them by the alienating parent. And
Like,
it gets to a point, you are what you eat. And that goes for us mentally as well. If you are consuming a ton of mental garbage, you're going to think mental garbage. And that's what is happening to the child. The erased parent sees this, and there's this knee-jerk reaction of, oh my God, is this really how they're treating you? I can't believe it. And that's when they, in a sense, are goaded into a fight with the child because the child thinks they're acting on their own accord without even realizing that they are acting out a set of behaviors that were planted by the alienating parent.
good point, because I think just when we're having this conversation, we're doing it with the lens that parental alienation is a form of child abuse or early childhood trauma. And so when children go through it at a younger age, they start erecting defense systems that later they'll be aware of or not aware of.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So I imagine that other parent, the erased parent, probably feels out of control. I mean,
Definitely.
yeah.
Because they're not interacting with the true form of their child. They're interacting with you could say, a more juvenile form of their ex, in a sense, because their ex has planted these ideas into the child, and now the child is just a talking puppet for the alienating parent. And so when they meet on that level, because the alienating parent has already planted out what you're going to say as the erased parent, how you're going to act, they've got it mapped out like clockwork. It's like and it's just this game of verbal chess. Like whatever move you make, they've got a counter move against you already.
Yeah, it's
And some
exhausting.
of it is not rooted in logic. It's a lot of it is just rooted in emotion. It's rooted in the, why don't you act this way? Why don't you do these things for me, without any sense of empathy or regard for anyone else, especially the erased parent.
Because I think ultimately children don't want to disappoint their parents. So when you were describing that one alienating parent as with her vanity, for example, and that sounded to me very much like a narcissistic personality where reputation is everything and the control and just they have to be the best and look the best and all of that. That's highly in alignment with some of the dominant traits of a narcissist.
It absolutely is. And you are on the dot with the idea of wanting to please the alienating parent, because the alienating parent has established this sense of what is right and what is wrong, and their identity is in line, is implanted into the child as well. So when the child acts in line with the wishes and demands of the alienating parent, they are rewarded for that, and they feel valued, they feel validated, because that seems to be the only way they can get some sense of validation from their alienating parent. And so they're chasing this feeling, hoping to be good enough for their alienating parent, because in their minds, part of that process of alienation is being planted the idea that the other parent didn't think they were good enough. And
That's actually something I come across quite commonly when I'm speaking to women. And I mostly speak to women that are experiencing alienation, that their children are just these incredible little super beings. One girl I know, she was actually talking to a senator in the United States, but her narcissistic, alienated father just couldn't acknowledge her, couldn't say great job, couldn't fulfill her self-esteem. And so no matter what these kids do, it's just not enough, because they almost become like invisible children if they're
yeah,
not in alignment with whatever the program is of that alienating parent. And it's really sad, because children are, of course, building up this core. They're building up their core self. And part of that core self is their self-esteem. And so it's putting holes in their self-esteem, pretty significant ones.
absolutely. And one thing to take note of is, behind the scenes, that narcissistic parent might be going out telling all their business friends, yeah, my daughter just talked to the senator and it was nothing. She's really good at all these things. And that's where any praise that should be going to the daughter or the child is actually going to into bragging and boasting amongst their circle to help elevate the alienating parent, or the narcissistic parent. And that's the only time they will speak positively about the experience, is when other people are watching.
Exactly, exactly. And that's really common, and it really is really hurtful and wounding to someone who's conscious and aware and can see it. And the child feels it. They might not process it till later, but their inner child definitely observes that and takes that in. They know.
Mhm.
I mean, we're kind of talking about children's identities and children being separate, because we, at the end of the day, we don't own our children. But at the same time, there's a reality that we're connected to our children, and energy is flowing from us to them all through the generational line. So that's another way to look at it, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a very difficult process, because later in life, the child will have to start to establish their own identity, and that's when you get this, in a sense, an identity crisis within them, because as they grow older, they want to assert themselves and have their sense of freedom, but it's different from the identity that was prescribed to them early on. And this is where oftentimes you'll hear in the alienation community, oh, sometime in the future, your children will come back. And it's a very triggering thing to hear for a lot of parents, because they say, oh yeah, when is this going to happen? Give me a time and a date, show me the proof. And totally understand that. But the premise behind that is that when a child starts to develop their own identity, that's when they start to realize that they're not being allowed to be anything except what serves the alienating parent. Now, this doesn't happen universally. It doesn't happen at a magical age. There's no magic number, unfortunately. And some kids never develop an identity of their own. And I speak that from experience. So there's a lot of possibilities across an entire spectrum of identity that a child can grow into. But at least to my understanding, as far as why a child starts to see through the lies of the alienating parent, that only really begins when their identity within themselves speaks truths that their fake identity, the prescribed identity, can't speak for. Where they want to become somebody on their terms, on their rules and values, instead of what they're being expected to be.
Yeah, absolutely. At that critical, at times where they start to question that. I mean, because we as human beings, children, all human beings, we're even more than our identity, we're our soul. And so this type of child abuse is even puncturing holes in their soul, I would put forward. And when that higher soul comes down to take a look and face that identity that is composed of their who am I, their self-esteem, so on and so forth, those questions are going to come up that you were just mentioning. And that's why this form of child abuse is so sad, because ultimately as children, we want to receive as much love as we can, unconditional positive regard from our parents, unconditional love from our mom and our dad. And if we have an alienated parent or a high conflict between mom and dad, then we're not receiving as much love as we possibly can when we're a child. And so the ramifications of that are when we grow up questioning our identity or whatever, we often feel like the world can't give us enough, or we can't get what we need, we can't take care of ourselves, we can't make enough money, because we originally were caught up in this in abuse where we didn't get the love that we needed. So that the consequences of that and how these children's lives unfold are very serious.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's just if you don't get enough love from mom and dad because they're in a high conflict divorce or in a power struggle over you, and when you get older and you can't find enough love in the world, and
Yep.
and you've got to work your way backwards. And that is one reason why I find parental alienation as a form of child abuse soaring and sad,
Mm-hmm.
because we only have one childhood.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and of course, this is an emotionally charged issue for all of us, but children face the most emotions. So, one question we want to talk about was, what kind of emotions do children endure or have to process during parental alienation?
Okay. So during the initial split of the family, there's a whole slew of emotions: fear, loss, and anger, and frustration. Some of those emotions are also self directed. Maybe they think that they played a part in the splitting of the family. It Obviously, this does depend on how old the child is. The children at a younger age are going to fear more for their safety. Children at a teenage level are going to start to look for someone to blame. It really does depend on their age, of course. But some of the common emotions that we can observe in alienated children are namely fear, anger, and grief. I would start with those three, and then you can start to expand upon that and see what are those emotions spiraling into as far as behaviors go. So with fear, one of the big things that you're going to see is there's a fear of safety, a fear of rejection, a fear of being not good enough, and all these fears are compounding into emotionally charged responses. So when a parent starts to question the behavior of the alienated child, then they're masking all this fear with anger. They're projecting out these angers. Oh, you never treat me good enough. You don't love me. You're only my egg donor. You're only my sperm donor. They're gonna throw out all these nonsensical statements at you to provoke you, because they're trying to convey that they're terrified. They're terrified of being of the narrative that that you, as the erased parent, don't care about them. They're terrified that the only stability in life they can hold on to is in control of the alienating parent. And they're terrified that if they engage into a relationship with you, it will bring back the instability from the initial split up.
And would they be afraid that they would lose that alienating parent's love?
Oh, absolutely. And they're terrified of losing that as well. The thing is, part of the narrative that they've been spoon fed over and over again is that the erased parent doesn't care, that the erased parent is, in a sense, completely independent of their relationship with the alienated child. Now, we know that's not true. We know that the erased parent wants everything they can to watch this child grow. But the thing is, like we said in the beginning of this episode, repetition is one of the most powerful forms of brainwashing. And they will not be able to see that truth until they hear it and feel it and see it over and over and over again. They need to be told that several times to challenge the truth that has been, in a sense, etched in stone in their brain. So, and that is why they're so scared, they're so afraid, and the only way they can protect themselves is by being angry. You know, it's a if you think about it, anger is a very emotionally and energetically draining uh, emotion. It's something you have to put a lot of energy to. You have to, in a sense, throw all the guck at somebody, and you're trying to intimidate that other person to leave you alone, to go away, and to not be around you.
Intimidating the erased parent.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what happens when that intimidation doesn't work? Well, while it does depend on the erased parent and how they're reacting, but what ends up happening is either they will turn up the anger, turn up the frustration, turn up the intensity of that emotion until they reach a breaking point within themselves where they can't take it no more. So in this instance, you got your alienated child throwing more and more fire at you. If you show that you're fireproof and you're stoic and you're just letting them speak their emotions, then they're going to realize that the anger doesn't work on you. And then either they will break down those defenses into a sense of grief and loss and be a bit more open and intimate with you, or they will, in a sense, kind of retreat away because they don't want you to see that they're so broken on the inside. It really does depend on how close a relationship you have with a child, but beyond the anger is fear, and beyond the fear is loss.
Well, that's really profound. I mean, through the process of parental alienation, we're really forcing kids to live in their anger. And how many adults do we see as we walk around in our world just living in anger and projecting anger and living in anger and fear? And that's a negative outcome for parental alienation. Probably the opposite of what a loving parent would really want for their children.
Absolutely. Now, in my personal case, there was one other emotion, and that's only because my case was reached an advanced enough level where I didn't react with anger first, I reacted with apathy. And so you could think of that as, in an advanced case, it would be apathy first, then anger, fear, and loss. Apathy because, well, if you care about this other person, then again, you're showing fear of building a connection. But apathy is a much more hurtful emotion because you're conveying to the other person, I don't even give you the time of day. I don't even give you the slightest bit of emotional connection. Even if it was anger, at least you have some sort of emotional connection. But to just stonewall and give nothing and be a complete robot.
Okay.
That is a stage that I personally reached with my mother. And when it's challenged, that's when apathy will turn into anger. But at that point, apathy is the easier way for the child to deal with this alienation process, simply because it's easier to not feel anything and pretend the feelings don't exist than it is to sit and be angry all the time. Because when you're angry, your eyebrows are scrunched, it takes up so much energy. And then mentally, you start to feel like this emotional fatigue, and then you start, uh, in a sense, burning out. So, how do you deal with that? You put those emotions in a bottle, you put it on the shelf, and you ignore it and let it ferment. And that's what a lot of these children are doing. And that's what I did as an individual.
Right. And what are some of the ways that that impacted your life, bottling it up,
Um,
apathy,
so
suppressing your emotions?
so I am somebody. It's harder to tell, but I am somebody who's very methodical and very logical in thinking. I grew up believing that emotions were a hindrance to our lives, and I grew up believing that, um, to be emotional means to be weak. And I made that association very early on in my life. And now this hurts me in multiple ways. Part of it, in the biggest way, is that I was losing out on emotional connection with anyone, simply because if I was allowing myself to believe that emotions were a form of weakness instead of a form of establishing connection, I would fall into these patterns of behaviors where I was always distant. I could talk about history and trauma and past experiences, but I would do it without emotion. And you might think, how is that even possible? And it is. And so here's how I would do it. If I wanted someone to go away, I would bring up a very conflicting trauma that somebody would think about it, emotionally process, and say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. That sounds so horrible." And then they feel awkward just being in your presence because that's the only thing they're thinking about. Now, subconsciously, this is not something that subconsciously this is the intention. Consciously thinking, this wasn't something I would think about. It wasn't like, okay, I'm just gonna drop, this basket full of trauma on someone's feet and make them freak out so they'll leave me alone. No, it was just but it was an easy way to get people to leave you alone, because people would feel like the moment they talk to you, they're afraid that they're going to, uh, in a sense, either bring out that trauma, or they're going to have to hear more about it and feel responsible for it. It's a very ugly feeling. So part of that was just falling into a line of behaviors where I was creating emotional distance from people. So if you create emotional distance, you don't have to feel emotional, and then you can feel like life is going as you should. And that was a very big mistake of my life, because I remember there was a time where I was in this process of rigorous self work and trying to figure out where my faults were. And I remember always feeling like I was just kind of drowning. I was just going through life like I was in the middle of the giant ocean, and I was just trying to find things to hold on to. And through a lot of meditation, a lot of thought, and a lot of personal work and reading books and a few other things, I started to recognize that that drowning feeling was that I was drowning in my own emotions, because I was ignoring them so long and for so much, that everything was always above head level, and I was just trying to kick my way up and stay above the surface and just get through life. And it wasn't until I made that recognition, it wasn't until I experienced that I was able to realize that emotions have a purpose in our life, and that emotions are there not because it makes us weaker, but in fact it strengthens our connection to other people.
Yeah, emotions are everything. There are navigation systems through through the world. They're our radar system. They're our emotions are power. They're our energy in motion. But back to what you were saying, when you were saying you were emotionally disconnected from others because of the original disconnection with your mom, right? If you
Yeah,
can't receive love from your mom and be deeply connected to her, you can't ultimately deeply connect with another human being later on. And that I think we just keep underscoring that point. But
absolutely.
I'm so glad to hear that you processed all of those emotions, because so many of us don't, and we're not taught how to, and we're just walking around like human bombs, projecting out our anger and living in our fear, and all of that blocks our potential. So I'm curious, when you became connected back with your mom, how you how did your emotional connections with others change?
I think
What did you
it was a very slow process. I won't say that once I reconnected with my mom, that's when everything changed. You know, it was a very slow process of learning, in a sense, relearning um, behaviors that I should have learned at a younger age. You know, maybe other people in who grew up in better homes would have 20, 25 years of experience working through their emotions, and you could say that I was just born trying to learn all this. And through that process, I used a lot of resources. I used a lot of books. I used a lot of especially books on psychology. I would try and be more involved with my friends. There were a lot of moments in my life, even now, where I would recognize that I wasn't mentally present in the moment. So, what I mean by this is I could be having a mundane conversation with a friend, and I'm just kind of parroting whatever my friend is saying, maybe mirroring it, just so that I don't have to be actively involved in the conversation while I mentally think about something else. And so this kind of mental multitasking that I would develop, and that I've developed across the years, and I still do, um, would mean that I'm not present. You know, what it's almost like somebody is playing squash by themselves. They could just bounce their ideas off of me and it bounce right back to them, and they feel like they're getting a decent conversation out of it, but I'm not actually there. It's not a game of tennis where we're bouncing a ball back and forth. He's just bouncing it off of a stone wall. And so in that instance, I had to recognize these moments and say, hold on a moment. I'm actually not mentally here, and I should be. I should give this person my time and my full attention, because one, it's a point of respect, it's a point of connection, and it will give me the opportunity to recognize the more subtle nuances of building a relationship with somebody, whether that's as friends, that's intimate, or even just between myself and my mother. And when I was able to do that, even even on a smaller scale, and a more, you could say, immature or underdeveloped scale, I was able to at least unlearn some of the mistakes I was making. One of the big ones being not being mentally present.
And so what do you get when you're what do you get that's even more meaningful when you're mentally present?
There definitely is an emotional element of it that is not so. For example, if when I'm not mentally present, I'm more apathetic to what's happened. Somebody could be excited about something, and I would mirror that excitement just enough so that they feel good about themselves, but I wouldn't feel that excitement that they're feeling, if that makes sense. And so what would end up happening, they're bouncing their ideas off of me like playing squash by yourself, and instead of me being there and sharing an experience with somebody, I would be just pretty much mirroring that energy back and thinking about things that I thought were more important. And so instead of that, instead of engaging in that kind of behavior, I would try and focus more on being mentally present. And then I feel their emotions, I feel the things that they're feeling, and I understand why they are the kind of person that they are. And it's almost like you're being allowed to see through the eyes of another person just by experiencing those emotions that they are experiencing. And in that regard, you feel more connected with a person and you feel more open to share experiences that will resonate with them. Not in the sense like how I described earlier, where you're just taking this big bucket of trauma and dropping it on their feet. Instead, it's more of a relational thing where maybe that's not something I need to share about that I feel insecure about. Maybe it's the need to be the best at something, or maybe it's that fear of not being good enough, or that fear of not being somebody who my older siblings could look up to, for example. And what ends up happening is they in turn will feel closer and more understanding of myself versus Andrew being this, you could say, mystical lone wolf figure who is there when you need it, but never asked anyone to be there for him.
Right. And taking all of that into consideration, what you just shared, what's valuable about that to you right now?
Well, you feel more alive. You feel more happier considering that instead of being a lone wolf, instead of being somebody that is standing alone, but trying to do all the impossible things that most people would never even consider trying to do, you feel like you actually have some semblance of belonging in the world. You feel like you have people that you can rely on and you can accept, and that regardless of all the personal flaws that we carry as human beings, that I, as an individual, am okay. I don't have to feel like the a perfect paragon of quintessential achievement. You know, I don't have to be this apex of humanity. I can just be a truer version of myself.
You're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Truer version of yourself.
And so, in relation to the alienated child, this is obviously leagues beyond what they're going to be thinking about, and that obviously, as parents, you're going to want your child to push themselves towards this level of self-actualization, and in order to help them reach that, they have to start to see the patterns of that fear, that anger, and that frustration that is holding them back and preventing them from growing their identity and growing their emotional intelligence.
So that's a call you're putting out there to erased parents,
Oh, absolutely.
as a way to respond to their child that's gone through a process of alienation, child abuse,
And I
alienation.
would go so far as to make that same challenge to the erased parents as well, because the best way we can help people is by leading by example. And your your alienated child is not going to feel motivated to live that life because it's a painful process. It's a very destructive process. I mean, in the Buddhist sense, you know, it's destructive. You are taking away the things that, well, you're taking away the negative reactions, the coping mechanisms that sometimes we think define our behavior. Removing those and identifying the source of pain and healing the original wounds. And in doing so, you're able to live a more fulfilled life, a more peaceful life that is not a knee jerk reaction to old wounds caused by other people. And so we lead by example, and your children will see that. They'll see that peaceful behavior. They'll see that sense of strength, and they'll recognize that, and they will admire that. And the first thing
They'll
the
feel that.
first thing, yeah, and the first thing that everybody thinks about when it comes to admiration is, how do they get there and how do I get there? And there's a reason why we admire the strong people. There's a reason why we admire the like all these top percenters in anything, be it athletes, finance, business, or coaches, etc. We look up to them. We see the strength they carry, and we say, I want to be like that. So likewise, your child's going to see the strength that you carry, and they're going to want to become more like that. If an erased parent allows themselves to be a victim of their emotions and a victim of the traumas they've gone through, they're going to have all these angry, knee-jerk reactions, and the child's going to say that and say, well, I don't really want to be with you because there's so much drama involved. And so that's why it's a call for personal work, because that is how you're able to lead by example. In doing so, you pave the road for your alienated child to walk that path as well.
Yeah, because we're talking about emotions alienated children might experience and express. And one of them, you touched on this, was apathy, but before that you said anger. And maybe before anger, or mixed up with anger, would be hatred, like feeling hatred towards their mother or their father. Like, do you think that, like, because if one parent hates the spouse, then that child would say, okay, well, dad hates mom, so I have to hate her too, or vice versa, the other way, where a child would feel hatred towards their own parent?
Does the child hate their parent? It's one of those yes and no kind of answers, unfortunately. Yes, in the sense where this is part of the identity that's being put into them. So when they're told what's allowed, what's not allowed, hating the other parent, hating the erased parent is part of that identity. It's a very ugly process.
The
And
energy of hatred is being instilled in them, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when they're being hateful, they're not thinking about the hate. They're not thinking about how the other parent is feeling. They're only thinking about the fear that's driving the hate. Maybe one of the things that you might hear, actually, I can't remember who said it. It was the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. The opposite of love is indifference. And the reason for that is hate invokes a sense of disappointment. Hate means that I wanted you to be something, but you're not, and I'm mad that you're not. And so so if you break down that emotion that they're feeling, and they're saying, I wanted you, they're probably thinking in their head, I wanted you to be the perfect mother, the perfect father in a relationship that would have stayed together, but you didn't. And now I'm angry at you for it. And they're pushing all that anger and frustration onto you. And that's being done in the form of attacks on your character, attacks on your behaviors and any hobbies you might have. It might be incorporated into insults and things that are just completely not true, and unreasonable demands that no child would ever make.
Social media attacks?
Absolutely, that too. And all of that is done to project that anger, that frustration of, I wanted a perfect family, but and quote unquote, they believe, but the erased parent is the reason for that failed relationship. Again, this is what's inculcated into them. It's not true. So that's one of the core distinctions I want to make. Now, after this whole hateful process, maybe days later, there is possibly a sense of guilt and shame. It does depend on how advanced that alienation process is, because some people, myself included, might deal with that guilt and shame with apathy. You just put it into a bottle, put those emotions on the shelf, and let it ferment. So instead of dealing with it, they will put that guilt and shame onto the shelf, And what happens is the next interaction with the erased parent, that's when they they have this track history of all these hateful things they've said. And you could think of it kind of like the sunk cost fallacy, is like you can't back out because you've given so much energy already into this one endeavor. So if they back out, then they feel more misaligned with themselves, because their identity again is built on hatred. It's built on being spiteful and venomous. So
So
in
there's
order to keep in line, yeah,
egos coming up, right? Their ego
yes.
saying, yeah, you can't back out now because of all the
Mm-hmm.
shit that's gone down.
Absolutely. And so, in order to keep in line with the original behaviors that have been prescribed to them, they have to follow this pattern of behavior. Otherwise, they feel caught and conflicted, because they start thinking, you know, is this the truth? Am I the bad person for being hateful? Am I the bad person for saying all these mean things? Am I the bad person for pushing you away? And so there's all that guilt that gets wrapped up into the fear, which already was very strong to begin with, and that intensifies the anger that they shoot out at you.
Yeah, that's a toxic storm. A toxic storm. Little side note that children or humans that are disconnected from their mom and dad are so much more of a higher risk of developing a fatal disease or comorbidity.
Mhm.
It's like one parent and then two parents is like 70+% that you will develop a serious disease if you're disconnected from your mom and dad.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do we go from here, Andrew?
Well, I think that one of the big questions that parents will ask after hearing all of this is, you know, well, so we've said that a child is fearful and they're acting out of fear and they're acting through the lens of anger. And we've said that their identity is being manipulated by the alienating parent. What do you do? How do you tell your kid that you love them? How do you reach out to them? Is it okay if I give them this gift? Is it okay if I call them? Do I attend their graduation, their sports games, their concerts? What do I do? You know, it seems like everything I do is wrong. And I think that a lot of parents experience this. And the hard part is that it's obviously going to be different for everyone. You know, everyone's got a different kid, and the kid's going to be growing up in a different universe, and they have to adapt their behaviors accordingly. But there are some recommendations I think you and I have made across multiple episodes that would be very fruitful for the listener today. And I think the first one is multiple acts of subtlety are far more powerful than one big act of love.
Well said.
And so the thing is, like, if say your kid has a baseball game, they say, I don't want you to attend my baseball games. If your relationship isn't going to get any worse, then there's no reason not to. I mean, frankly speaking, you should be going anyway. Whether you can be a silent cheerleader in the stands. If they're at the baseball game, they've got bigger things to worry about. You know, where's the ball going? Who's the guy they need to worry about on the enemy team? What coach is saying? You know, they have a whole lot of things to worry about. If you're just there as a silent supporter, even if you decide to film it for yourself later, for example, just go anyway. Multiple acts of subtlety will help you create a track record of positive interactions with your kid, even if they react negatively. So, same thing with concerts, same thing with their graduation, for example. I know right now is graduation season. And so, a lot of parents are asking, do I attend my kid's high school graduation or their college graduation? Absolutely. This is a one time event. And do it by whatever means necessary, because when the time comes and they start asking you these questions of what have you done, then you can lay it out for them and show them the track record of your progress, the track record of your efforts to be a part of their life. Other acts of subtlety include things like just small encouragements. I know in our episode 9 Pitfalls Alienated Parents Make with Children, with alienated children, there's a small segment right at the end where we talk about Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. And just as a quick refresher, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, material gifts, and physical touch. That's 5 different ways that as an individual, as a parent, you can really bond with your child, really connect with them, and give them something that feels positive.
Yeah, that's really nice. Just the consistency of all of those acts of love towards your alienated child.
Absolutely.
Towards your child, even if we take off that label of alienated, they're still your child, and there's some natural rights that you have and natural laws of love you can be applying in subtle ways so that you don't flood them out because emotions, because it is such a charged situation.
Absolutely.
I think you've also recommended finding common points of interest like movies or, sports that are lighter entry points to dialogue.
Definitely. You definitely want to engage in what I would call micro commitments, smaller yeses that lead to the big yes. Again, in our episode with Ginger, we would say, if you treat it like dating, it gives you a chance to kind of give it the same sense of lightness that you would when trying to interact with someone that you might be interested in. You can't walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, my name is Andrew, let's get married." But instead, maybe, just something lighter, something where that way you can try and build a relationship with them. You can't go, "Hi, I'm dad, why don't we have a relationship?" "Hi, I'm mom, why don't you talk to me anymore?" Try something lighter, try something happier, and try and provoke them to answer, at least in conversationally, questions that are not related to the family dynamics. And so things in regards, like you were saying, with mutual points of interest, or even if they're interested in something, just immerse yourself into that world, see what it's like, and ask questions about it. And it just like with somebody else, with a friend, maybe a friend is interested in something that as an individual you're not too familiar with. Showing interest in that makes their world feel more exciting. They're like, "Oh, well, it gives them the chance to be the expert. Let your kid be the expert of something they're interested in, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's games, movies, or anything, sports, whatever, and art, or, and just let them be the expert. It gives them a sense of authority, a sense of belonging. Like, I'm a part of this community and I can show you how awesome this community is."
Yeah, just to get some momentum, positive relational momentum going.
Absolutely.
Question.
So that's one of the big ways you can connect with your alienated child. The second one, and this is more indirect, is personal work. And it sounds crazy, but like we mentioned, again, I'm referencing Penny's episode. Penny would say conflict is an inside job. It's a point of going through and realizing, how can we as individuals become a better person, become a more stronger person, and be more capable of taking on these bigger challenges in our lives. So if you hang the value of your life onto whether or not your children love you, you're going to feel like your life is worthless and meaningless, because there's only one variable that determines your life's value. And the truth is, your life is way more valuable than just that, just one relationship. or one or several relationships, your life is a multitude of so many different things. All your passions, your hobbies, your work life, your intimate life, all of these things come together to form the you that is you. And you have the potential as an individual to really rise up and be the best version of you in anything that you want to be. And so rather than getting so caught up in the emotional turmoil of your child rejecting you, start looking for ways to make you as an individual a more, you could say, attractive person to be around. Be the fun mom, be the fun dad, the guy or the girl who's out there making changes in the world that means something to you as an individual. And as you go out there and you put out that kind of energy, naturally you're going to attract more and more people. And there's an element of pre-selection in there where, you know, if you have a bunch of kids hanging out with you and wanting to be with you and spend time with you, and your child is going to see that and say, what is the secret sauce? Why are they so cool? What's the answer to this riddle, this mystery? And they're going to want to find out. And that's when they're going to start kind of timidly taking a couple steps towards you. Maybe they'll send you a text or something, see how you're doing, and just to test the waters. And then you can kind of slowly invite them into your world. The issue I think that a lot of parents have is their whole world has fallen apart and they don't know where to start to build that. They don't know how to put their life back together, and maybe they define themselves as a as their partner's supporter or something like that. And now they don't have any role or any sense of belonging. And I think, Barbara, you could speak a little bit more in depth on this as far as the power of having a coach and the power of having someone in your support network to help you lay down the foundations of your life.
Well, as usual, Andrew, I never answer your question right away because I just want to back up to something that you said that I thought was really powerful. And you said, invite them into your world. So I'll just reframe that to, yeah, like the invitation is to meet your alienated child where they are and invite them into your world. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Absolutely.
When I meet women in my coaching practice, I really encourage women to get support. Emotional support makes the difference. So whether that's conflict in divorce or conflict pertaining to your child, alienated or not, I really truly believe that emotional support, heart-centered, intentional, solution-focused support can make such a difference for women or men or any parent going through something like this. And when the parents change, the children actually feel the shift, even if they're teenagers or in their early 20s. So it's the work that parents need to do, and no one can do it for them. No one can do it for us but ourselves. But having that support, very intentional support with the right person, allows you to make those breakthroughs to achieve the healing that you want, or the reunification that you're hoping for, or whatever your goals are in the conflict. There's so many incredible lessons and gifts to learn in conflict, and parental alienation is a conflict, a complicated, multi-layered, emotionally charged, long-term conflict.
Absolutely. I think it was very well said.
Thank you. Well, this has been a very exciting hour.
Yeah, definitely has been. Well, I mean, I guess that's right about all we can cram into this 1 hour for today. Once again, everyone, thank you for taking the time to be with us. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel either on YouTube or to our podcast through iTunes or Spotify. We also are putting out a lot of little mini bite videos out there just to try and get those core points out there for listeners, especially for you who don't have time to listen to the whole hour. We definitely encourage listening to the whole hour. So definitely give us a shot, and I'm sure you'll enjoy all of it. Barbara, if people wanted to listen to you, if people wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do so?
I invite anyone to reach out to me at any time to talk. Email me, barbara@barbaralapointe.com. My website is barbaralapointe.com. And
I know.
well, I'm there. I'm there for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, definitely. And don't forget, we include a downloadable document below. It's actually on Barbara's website, barbaraLapointe.com/podcast. It'll help you and your loved ones deal with all of these challenges of trauma, high conflict, and especially reconnecting with an alienated child. If you want to reach out to me, you can email me at startnow@andrewfaulkner.com. And as always, thank you for taking the time to be with us today at the Broken Families podcast, where we discuss and help you find solutions to divorce, alienation, and high conflict relationships. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Beautiful. Bye, Andrew.